The trash bag hit the ground with a dull thud right next to my foot. On that cold Tacoma winter night, under the street lamp in front of our house, I saw my daughter in an SUV, kissing her female friend instead of her husband. The sound of the wipers scraping the windshield mixed with the pounding of my heart and rang in my ears. I froze on the spot. I had endured and I had crumbled. And all I could see in my mind was my granddaughter's face. Do I run away, or do I face this like an adult? That night, for the first time, I realized I had to live not just as a father, but as a grandfather. Why I made the choice I did, I will tell you from here on. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. I live in a small single-story house in suburban Tacoma, Washington, with my wife Susan. At 70 years old, I'm a retired Seattle City bus driver. After 30 years on the job, these days, my only real joy is when my granddaughter Lily visits on weekends. That night started out like any other. It was past 10 o'clock when I picked up the black plastic trash bag from the kitchen. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The temperature had already dropped below freezing, and cold air hit my face. The narrow street in front of our house was quiet, with only a lonely streetlight casting its glow. I was about to open the trash bin lid when my eyes naturally drifted across the street. A silver SUV was parked there. Normally, I would have just ignored it, but that night was different. There were two people inside the car. Under the streetlight, I could make out a familiar profile. It was my daughter Hannah. And sitting next to her was Rachel, Hannah's college friend, who Lily now calls Aunt Rachel. I stood frozen, still holding the trash bag. The two of them seemed to be having an intense conversation. The window must have been cracked open slightly, because I could faintly hear their voices carrying through the winter air. Hannah said something about how living with Mark was just enduring, just getting through it. My heart sank to hear her talk about my son-in-law Mark like that. But what came next was even more shocking. Rachel said they should leave together, take Lily with them. As soon as those words left her mouth, the two of them embraced. And then they kissed. It was brief, but unmistakable. The trash bag slipped from my hands and hit the ground with a thud. Neither of them noticed. I stood there, barely able to breathe. What did I just see? I kept asking myself over and over. I couldn't believe that my daughter had just kissed someone other than her husband. And that someone was a woman. My legs were shaking, but somehow I made it back inside. The television in the living room was playing the Seattle local news. The anchor was talking about something, but I couldn't hear a single word. Susan was doing dishes in the kitchen. She asked me why I'd been outside so long. I steadied my voice and told her I was just getting some air. Susan didn't ask anything more and went back to drying the dishes. I sank onto the couch and stared blankly at the ceiling. My mind had gone completely white. That's when I heard a door open down the hallway. Lily came out in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. My 7-year-old granddaughter asked if Aunt Rachel had come to our house again today. My heart dropped. Lily asked so casually, as if Rachel coming to our house every day was perfectly normal. I forced a smile and told her no, Rachel hadn't come today. Lily looked disappointed and went back to her room. Sitting on that couch, all kinds of thoughts raced through my mind. Had I pushed Hannah into that marriage? I remembered how I'd pressured my daughter to build a normal family. When Hannah graduated from college and said she had no plans to get married, I worried about what the church people would think. So when Mark proposed, I pushed her to accept. Now I wondered if that had been a mistake. I heard the front door code being punched in. The door opened and Hannah walked in. There was a faint smell of wine, and her cheeks were flushed. I pretended to watch television, but I glanced at Hannah's face. There was something on her lips. A deep red lipstick mark. The same color Rachel always wore. Hannah went straight to her room without even saying hello. I stayed on that couch until dawn, unable to sleep. That night, only one thought kept circling in my mind. What should I do? Should I pretend I didn't see anything, or should I confront this head-on? I couldn't find an answer. The next morning, I went to the local Tacoma diner as usual. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs Benedict. The waitress smiled brightly as she poured my coffee. I took a sip, but the scene from last night kept replaying in my mind. Still, I tried to reassure myself. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I'd seen it wrong. After finishing my meal, I headed to the register. The waitress asked how my daughter was doing these days. This neighborhood is so small that everyone knows everyone else. I nodded and said she was doing well. Busy with her counseling work at the school. The waitress smiled and said I must be proud. As I left the diner and walked toward my car, I noticed something across the street. Rachel's coffee shop in the strip mall. The sign read, Rachel's Roastery. But there were two people standing in front of the shop. Hannah and Rachel. The store hadn't even opened yet. But they were standing there so naturally with their hands on each other's shoulders. I watched them from inside my car for a long time. They were talking and laughing. They looked like lovers. That's when I knew for certain that last night hadn't been my imagination. When I got home, Susan was preparing lunch. I could hear soup bubbling in the pot. Susan asked if I'd noticed that Hannah and Mark seemed awkward lately. I sat down at the kitchen table and replied that young couples these days are all busy. I tried to act like it was nothing, but my hand gripped the fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. Susan continued, Mark apparently goes to work even on weekends and barely comes home. When she asked Hannah about it, Hannah just said it was a busy season. I nodded while eating my soup. But inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't that Mark wasn't coming home. It was that Hannah wasn't home. That weekend, Lily came to visit us. As soon as the front door opened, she ran inside. She called out for Grandpa and Grandma and threw her arms around us. Lily pulled out a box of colored pencils from her bag. She said she had homework to do. She sat down at the living room table and started drawing. I sat next to Lily and asked what she was drawing. Lily moved her pencil and said it was a family picture. Looking at the drawing made my heart sink. In the center of the paper, Mom and Aunt Rachel were holding hands with Lily standing between them. Dad was drawn small in the corner. I carefully asked why Dad was over there. Lily said matter-of-factly that Dad is always at work anyway. Then she smiled and added that she wished she could live with Mom and Aunt Rachel. Just the three of them. And Dad could live at work. I couldn't breathe for a moment. To hear those words from a 7-year-old was shocking. Lily was sensing that something was wrong. I stroked Lily's hair and told her that Mom and Dad both love her. Lily nodded and went back to her drawing. In the evening, Hannah came to pick up Lily. I had Hannah sit on the living room couch. Susan was doing dishes in the kitchen. I carefully asked how things were with Mark. Hannah's expression hardened for a moment. She told me not to interfere with their marriage. Dad. Her voice was firm. I couldn't ask anything more. But in my heart, I was certain. Something was very wrong. After Hannah and Lily left, Susan came into the living room. She sat on the couch and sighed. She brought up something she'd heard at a church gathering. She said the news these days talks about women living together. And all sorts of things. Susan shook her head and said she didn't understand how the world was changing. I put down the TV remote. And said we don't need to pretend we understand everything about how people live. Susan didn't say anything more. But I knew. Susan was thinking about Hannah too. We just weren't saying it out loud. That night in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about it. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Lily was getting more and more confused. Mark must have noticed something. Hannah was living a lie. Someone had to sort this out. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Lily's teacher. Her voice was cautious. She asked if I could come to the school. She wanted to talk about Lily's drawing. I told her I'd be there tomorrow morning. After hanging up, my heart was pounding. I had a feeling something big was coming. And that feeling was right. The next morning, I headed to Tacoma's public elementary school. I parked in the lot and walked toward the classroom. The hallway felt unusually long. When I opened the classroom door, the teacher greeted me warmly. She was a young woman. The walls were covered with drawings the children had made. The teacher led me toward the wall. It was the My Family Project corner. Each child had drawn their own family. It didn't take long to find Lily's drawing. Her name was written clearly at the bottom. The moment I saw the drawing, I felt like I couldn't breathe. In the center of the paper, Mom Hannah and Aunt Rachel were holding hands. Lily stood between them, smiling. A heart was drawn above the three of them. Dad Mark was drawn small in the right corner. separate from everyone else, standing alone. The teacher spoke carefully. She said Lily had been talking a lot lately about how she wishes Mom and Aunt Rachel could get married. She even tells her friends during recess. My throat went dry. I drank a cup of water, but my throat still felt scratchy. The teacher looked at me with worried eyes. I told her it was probably just kid talk. The teacher nodded, but her eyes remained concerned. I left the school and got in my car. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It was clear that Lily was sensing something. I drove into downtown Tacoma, to the strip mall where Rachel's coffee shop was located. I parked and went inside. It was around 2 in the afternoon, so there weren't many customers. I ordered coffee at the counter. An employee was moving around busily taking orders. While waiting for my coffee, I scanned the area behind the counter. A CCTV monitor was mounted on the wall. The screen was split into 4 sections showing different areas of the shop. But then I saw something strange on the monitor. It showed playback in progress. Someone was reviewing last night's footage. The screen showed the empty cafe. It must have been after closing. But there were 2 people sitting at a table. My heart dropped. It was Hannah and Rachel. They were holding each other. And then they kissed. A moment later, a busy employee was searching for something under the counter. It looked like she was looking for a backup USB. A small black USB drive. The employee pulled out the USB. But then a customer order came in and she rushed to the counter. The USB fell to the floor. I looked around. No one was paying attention. The employees were all busy and the customers were sitting at their own tables. I nudged the USB with my foot toward myself. Then I bent down and picked it up. It read, "Comeback UP." I quietly slipped the USB into my coat pocket. My heart was racing. I could hardly believe what I was doing. I took my coffee and left the shop. As soon as I got in the car, I exhaled deeply. My hands were shaking so much I could barely start the engine. When I got home, I went straight to my study. I locked the door and pulled out my old laptop. My hand trembled as I inserted the USB. Files began to open. There were several videos. They were organized by date. I clicked on one. Rachel's Cafe appeared on the screen. It was during business hours. Hannah walked in with Lily. Rachel greeted them warmly. Lily ran to the counter and hugged Rachel. The 3 of them looked so natural together. I opened the next video. This time it was nighttime. After the shop had closed, Hannah and Rachel were alone. The 2 of them sat across from each other at a table, drinking wine. They talked, then looked at each other. Then they stood up and embraced. I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the laptop. I pulled out the USB and held it in my hand. This could destroy my daughter's life. That thought came to me. At the same time, I thought it could also protect my granddaughter's life. I went to the kitchen and opened the pantry. There was a large flour container. I carefully hid the USB underneath it. I came back to the living room and sat on the couch. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Mr. Miller, do you have time tonight? Could we grab a beer?" Reading it made my hands shake. Mark knew something too, or at least he was feeling something. I texted back that I'd be there. I knew how difficult that night would be. But I couldn't avoid it. It was time to face the truth. That night, I met Mark at a sports bar in downtown Tacoma. Large TVs on the walls were showing NFL highlights. Mark had arrived first. He was sitting at a corner table, drinking beer. When I approached, he stood up and shook my hand. Neither of us spoke for a while. We raised our beer glasses and clinked them together. The sound seemed unusually loud. Mark spoke first. He asked if he could be honest. I nodded. He said Hannah has been avoiding him lately. Mark's voice shook. She barely comes home, and when she does, all she talks about is Rachel. He said he didn't know if he was being jealous or if he'd done something wrong. Mark took a sip of beer and lowered his head. I asked carefully if they'd talked about divorce. Mark looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "Yes," he said. "We did. She told me not to ask why. She said I should raise Lily." Hearing those words made my heart sink. Hannah had really decided on divorce. And she wouldn't even say why. I thought about the USB hidden in the pantry. I thought about Lily's drawing. But I couldn't bring it up just yet. Mark continued. He said he knew he hadn't helped with housework or childcare. He admitted that he'd used work as an excuse to avoid home. But still, divorce? Mark's voice got quieter. He asked if he'd really been that bad of a husband. I patted Mark's shoulder. I told him it probably wasn't just his fault. Mark nodded gratefully. We talked for another hour or so. Mark worried about Lily. He said she'd been saying strange things at school lately. She says she wants to live with Mom and Aunt Rachel, just the three of them. Mark gave a bitter smile. She doesn't even mention me. I told Mark to wait a few days. I said I'd have a proper talk with Hannah. Mark nodded. On the drive home, the car felt heavy. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. I couldn't put this off any longer. When I got home, the living room lights were on. Hannah's car was parked outside. She'd come here instead of going to Mark's house. I opened the front door and went inside. Hannah was sitting on the couch looking at her phone. She looked surprised to see me. Susan had already gone to bed. I sat down next to Hannah. I asked quietly, "Did you really talk to Mark about divorce?" Hannah's face hardened. She asked what right I had to ask her that. I said calmly that her husband had called me tonight. Crying, Hannah turned away. I continued, "Did she know what Lily was saying at school?" Hannah didn't answer. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of Lily's drawing. I'd taken a picture when I visited the school. When Hannah saw the drawing, tears welled up in her eyes. She bit her lip and lowered her head. "Dad, I don't want to live a lie anymore," Hannah said in a trembling voice. "I've loved women my whole life." Hannah confessed, "But you pushed me into this marriage framework with all your talk about normal families." I was at a loss for words. Because it was true, I had pushed Hannah into marriage. But I had something to say too. I told her that cheating on her husband and involving her child was still wrong. Hannah shouted, "Then should I have lived as a fake person my whole life?" Her voice shook. I said quietly that I understood how she felt. But I asked what she was going to do about Lily. Hannah wiped her tears and answered. She thought it would be better for Mark to raise Lily. She wasn't in the right headspace right now. That's when I heard a sound from the hallway. The door was slightly open. Susan was looking at us through the crack. Susan's eyes were wet. She whispered, "When did our home become like this?" At that moment, Lily's door opened too. Lily stood in the hallway with sleepy eyes. She asked if Grandpa and Mom were crying again. That's when I made my decision. It was time to be the adult. Time to clean up this mess. I carried Lily back to her room. I tucked her into bed and pulled the covers over her. Lily fell asleep quickly. I came back to the living room. Hannah and Susan were sitting side by side on the couch. I stood in front of them. "We need to sit down together and sort this out," I said. "Hannah, this isn't just your problem anymore. Call Mark tomorrow. And Rachel too," I said firmly. "All four of you need to sit down and talk." Hannah shook her head. But I didn't back down. I told her this wasn't a negotiation. Susan nodded too. We couldn't let this situation continue. For Lily's sake, the adults had to take responsibility. None of us slept well that night. But I knew one thing. Starting tomorrow, everything would change. I didn't sleep for several days. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling. But my resolve didn't waver. Saturday morning, I called Hannah. I told her to come to the house at 2 in the afternoon. I was calling Mark and Rachel too. Hannah objected. She said this was too much. But I was firm. I told her she didn't have a choice. I called Mark too. My voice shook, but I tried to stay calm. I said there was something important to discuss. And asked him to come to the house. Hannah contacted Rachel. I was too nervous to call her directly. Hannah explained the situation to Rachel, and Rachel agreed to come. Susan kept objecting. She asked what kind of disgrace this was. What if the neighbors found out? I told Susan we'd been hiding long enough. It was time to sort things out. Susan hesitated for a long time, then nodded. She went to the kitchen and started preparing coffee. Her hands shook so much she almost dropped a cup. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mark arrived first. His face was pale and he had dark circles under his eyes. I led him to the living room. Mark sat carefully on one side of the couch. He placed his hands on his knees and didn't move. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Hannah and Rachel came together. Both looked tense. The living room atmosphere grew heavy. When all four people sat around the table, the air itself seemed to freeze. Susan brought out coffee, but no one touched it. Everyone either stared at each other or looked at the floor. I spoke first. I said everyone knew why we were here. We couldn't hide or avoid this anymore. Mark spoke in a trembling voice. He asked Hannah to please at least tell him why. Had he really been that terrible of a husband? Hannah answered with her head down. She just said the love had ended. Her voice was barely audible. Rachel sat next to her, gripping Hannah's hand tightly. She couldn't say anything, just bit her lip. I stood up and went to the pantry. I pulled out the USB I'd hidden under the flour container. My hands shook, but I moved as calmly as I could. I came back to the living room and quietly placed the USB on the table. All 4 people stared at it. This isn't about love ending, I said. This is evidence that a different love began. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I turned on the television. I plugged in the USB and opened a file. Rachel's cafe appeared on the screen. After closing time, the empty cafe. Hannah and Rachel were embracing each other. Then a kissing scene appeared. Mark covered his mouth. I could hear him struggling to breathe. Susan kept repeating, "Oh my God." Hannah covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook. Rachel closed her eyes and lowered her head. I turned off the television and looked at Hannah. I spoke quietly. "You loving women isn't your fault. That's just who you are." I continued, "But deceiving your husband and lying in front of Lily is something you definitely need to take responsibility for." Hannah looked up. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Dad, I'm sorry," Hannah said. Rachel tried to stand up. She said she would leave. Hannah should start over with her husband. But Hannah held Rachel's hand. She said, "No, I want to live my life as I really am now." Mark was silent for a long time. Then he slowly spoke. "Then let's get divorced," he said. I looked at Mark. Then I spoke. "I think you should get divorced. But both of you need to take equal responsibility for Lily. And I'm going to protect my granddaughter." I said firmly. "No matter what the adults do, Lily needs to be protected." Mark thought for a moment, then nodded. He said he'd start looking for a lawyer. His voice shook, but he was resolute. Susan was crying quietly. I held Susan's hand. I whispered that this was just the beginning. That afternoon meeting lasted over 3 hours. There were many tears and silences. But at least the truth was out. As the sun set, the 4 people left one by one. Mark was the last to leave. He held my hand. He said thank you. I was left alone in the living room. The television screen was off, and the coffee had gone cold. I sank onto the couch and sighed. I knew this was just the beginning. There was a mountain of things to sort out. But at least we had a direction now. About a week after that meeting, Hannah started going to a counseling center in Tacoma. She began receiving LGBTQ-related counseling. One day, Hannah stopped by the house. She came alone for the first time in a while. No Rachel, no Lily. We sat facing each other on the living room couch. Hannah took a sip of coffee and told me she was getting counseling. She said the counselor had asked when the most decisive moment in her life was. Hannah said she'd thought about it for a long time. Then she remembered something. The image of her father driving the bus out at dawn when she was young. I remembered that time. Hannah was in elementary school then. She'd wake up at 4 in the morning to pack a lunch and bring it to the front door. Hannah said she remembered how Dad always worried about his daughter. But he'd never once truly asked about her heart. I had nothing to say. Because it was true. I'd never asked Hannah what she wanted. I'd just imposed what I wanted on her. Hannah cried. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry. But I was hurting too." I held Hannah's hand. I told her I was sorry too. My throat tightened. "I never really asked you." I confessed. "I just pushed my standards into your life. I thought marrying a man would keep you safe. Honestly, I was afraid of what people would think." I continued. "So I put my reputation before your heart." As I spoke, my voice trembled. I'd driven a bus for almost 50 years. But I'd been a coward when it came to my daughter's heart. Susan came out of the kitchen. She must have been listening to our conversation. She quietly approached and sat next to Hannah. Susan said she'd sinned greatly. She thought love only came in one shape. Then she covered her face with her hands. Hannah held Susan's hand. "Mom, don't apologize. You were taught that way too," Hannah said. The 3 of us sat in silence for a long time. Only the living room clock ticked away. Then the front door opened. I heard Lily's voice. "Grandpa, I'm here." Hannah had gone to pick up Lily. Lily ran into the living room. She pulled colored pencils from her bag. "Grandpa, look." I drew this again. She unfolded the drawing. This time the family picture was different. Mom, Dad, Aunt Rachel, Grandma, and Grandpa were all drawn together. Lily said her teacher told her that families all look different. But if they protect each other, that's a real family. I stroked Lily's hair. Yes, that's right, I said. My throat tightened again. Hannah hugged Lily. Mom made things really confusing. I'm sorry, Hannah whispered. Lily shook her head. It's okay. I understand everything, she said. Those weren't words a 7-year-old should say. But Lily seemed to have grown up a lot. After Hannah and Lily left, I went into my study. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old file cabinet. I needed to prepare legal documents. I needed to consult with a lawyer. But there was one more thing I had to do first. I pulled out blank paper and picked up a pen. I began writing carefully. Last will and testament. I wrote for over an hour. I thought about who should inherit the Tacoma house. And what conditions to attach. I wrote the last line and signed. I dated it and put down the pen. It's time I acted like a real adult for once. I said to myself. Looking out the window, the sun was setting. The Tacoma sky was stained orange. I stared at that sky for a long time. Something was ending. At the same time, something was beginning. I decided to accept that change. Susan called me for dinner. I closed the study door and headed to the kitchen. I sat at the table and faced Susan. You talked well with Hannah today, Susan said. It must have been hard for you too. I nodded. We're all learning, I replied. It's fortunate we're learning now, even if it's late. Going to bed that night, I thought about what family means. It's not about being perfect. It's about accepting each other's imperfections. A few days later, I visited a small law firm in downtown Tacoma. The office was on the second floor of a building. The conference room was small but clean. Through the window, you could see downtown Tacoma. Hannah, Mark, and I sat at the table. The lawyer spread out documents. He was a middle-aged man with a calm expression. He said we should discuss custody first. He said we needed to clearly determine who would have custody. We also needed to decide on visitation rights. Mark took a deep breath. Then he spoke. He said he would raise Lily. But he didn't want to keep her from seeing her mother. Hannah's eyes welled up. She said that while she was Lily's mother right now, she felt like she was only causing confusion in Lily's life. The lawyer nodded and took notes. He suggested giving legal custody to the father, with regular visitation rights for the mother. I quietly pulled out an envelope of documents. I handed it to the lawyer. Inside was my notarized will. The lawyer began reading the documents. His eyebrows raised slightly. Hannah and Mark watched nervously. The will was clear. I was leaving the entire Tacoma house to Lily. There was a clause stating that neither Hannah nor Mark could sell or mortgage the house. I looked at them both and spoke. No matter what the adults do, Lily needs to have at least one place she can always come home to. Hannah shook her head. Dad, I don't deserve this. I really messed up badly, she said. I answered firmly. You said you'd take responsibility for your life, right? Then I'm taking responsibility for my role as grandfather. Mark spoke up. Mr. Miller, thank you. I'll protect that house for Lily's whole life. His voice shook, but his sincerity was clear. The lawyer continued organizing the documents. We worked out a specific custody schedule. Hannah could see Lily every weekend and spend a week together during vacations. The lawyer asked what to do about Rachel. Hannah answered that she would explain things to Lily slowly and honestly. The meeting went on for over 2 hours. We sorted through practical matters. One by one, property division, child support, visitation schedules. The moment came to sign the agreement. Hannah and Mark picked up their pens side by side. Both of their hands trembled. After the signatures were complete, the lawyer collected the documents. He said once they filed with the court, the divorce would be finalized in a few months. On the way out of the law office, the sunlight was dazzling. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket. I saw a trash can outside the building. I quietly dropped the USB into it. I prayed silently. May I never need this evidence again. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. Grandpa, let's have hot chocolate at the cafe after school today. I smiled reading it. Walking to the parking lot, Mark spoke to me. Mr. Miller, thank you sincerely. I'll raise Lily well. I patted Mark's shoulder. We're all doing this for Lily. That's what I said. Hannah stood a little distance away. I approached her. I told her to lift her head. Now go live your life, I said. But don't forget your responsibility as Lily's mother. Hannah nodded. On the drive home, I turned on the radio. Old country music was playing. The lyrics caught my ear. They said home isn't a building, it's people. I thought that was right. For Lily, home was all of us. I arrived at the Tacoma house. I opened the front door and went inside. Susan was sitting in the living room. She asked how it went. Everything sorted out, I replied. Now time will do the rest. Susan sighed with relief. That evening, I slept deeply for the first time in a while. I didn't even dream. I just fell into a deep sleep. A few months passed. Fall deepened and the first snow fell in Tacoma. The trees on the streets were left with bare branches. One Saturday afternoon, Susan and I headed to Rachel's cafe. Hannah had contacted us. She wanted everyone to get together. When I opened the cafe door, the familiar smell of coffee hit me. Hannah, Mark, Rachel, and Lily were sitting at a corner table. Lily saw me and came running. Grandpa, Grandma, she shouted and hugged us. I lifted Lily up and laughed. We sat around the table. It was the first time all 6 of us had gathered in a while. It was still awkward, but we weren't avoiding each other. Lily pulled a notebook from her bag. She said she wanted to show us her homework. She said her teacher told her something. Families all look different, but if they protect each other, that's a real family, Lily said. Then she unfolded a new drawing. In the picture, Mom, Dad, Aunt Rachel, Grandma, Grandpa, and Lily were holding hands in a circle. Everyone was smiling. Hannah looked at that drawing and tears fell. Lily, I think Mom became an adult too late. But I won't run away anymore. Lily hugged her mom. It's okay, Mom. I love you, Mom, she said. Mark spoke up. We're both parents, so let's respect each other in front of Lily. Your life is yours to choose. He looked directly at Hannah. Hannah nodded. She whispered thank you. Mark smiled faintly too. Rachel spoke carefully. I'll take responsibility in my place too. I want to be an adult who doesn't hide things from the child anymore. Not one who sneaks around. I looked at Rachel. I nodded and said, yes, let's do that. For Lily's sake. Susan ordered hot chocolate for Lily. Lily held the cup with a happy expression. We quietly drank our coffee. The sun began to set. Through the cafe window, we could see the orange sky. I looked at that sky and remembered the past. I remembered when I was young, driving the bus at dawn. Driving across downtown Seattle, carrying people around. I remembered something I'd once said to Lily. You can borrow toys, but you can't borrow people's hearts carelessly. Those were my words back then. This time, it felt like I was telling that to myself and to all 3 of them. You don't borrow people's hearts. You protect them. On the drive home, we took the Tacoma Highway. Susan sat in the passenger seat, quietly looking out the window. I looked at the Seattle skyline in the distance. The city lights were turning on one by one. We arrived home and sat in the living room. I told Susan that what we'd gotten wrong wasn't who our child loved. It was that we'd never once truly asked about her heart. I said. Susan quietly nodded. That night, I sat in my study and looked out the window. Snow was piling up softly in the Tacoma house yard. I thought about what this house would mean to Lily. I hoped it wouldn't just be a house her grandfather left behind, but a safe place she could always return to. A few days later, Lily came to our house alone. Mark had gone on a business trip, and Hannah had counseling. Lily and I built a snowman together. We laughed as we rolled snow in the yard. Susan made us hot chocolate. Sitting in front of the living room fireplace drinking hot chocolate, Lily asked me, Grandpa, is our family okay now? Her voice was careful. I hugged Lily and told her yes, we're okay now. The adults are all learning. Lily nodded. I stroked Lily's hair and thought about it. What is love for your children? It's not about covering up their mistakes. It's about pushing them to protect the most vulnerable person first. This time, that was Lily. And belatedly, it was also about our daughter's heart. I really didn't know that back then. Snow continued falling outside. Lily fell asleep in my arms. I looked at Lily and smiled quietly. Now our family had a new shape. It wasn't perfect, but we were a family trying to protect each other. And that was enough. Because love isn't about perfect form. It's about accepting each other's imperfections. I put Lily to bed and tucked in the covers. I closed the door slightly and came out, thinking, would this child remember this day when she grows up? Would she know that Grandpa tried to protect the family? I couldn't know, but at least I'd done my best. That was enough. Night deepened. The Tacoma house was warm. Snow was still falling outside, and Susan and I sat together on the couch. I said it felt like I'd finally become a real grandfather. Susan held my hand. You did well, she whispered. I nodded, and I made a promise to myself. Until Lily becomes an adult, I would protect this house. I truly understood now that you don't borrow people's hearts, you protect them. And I vowed to live practicing that. Stars shone in the Tacoma night sky. I looked out the window and smiled quietly. Our family was going to be okay. Everyone, have you ever felt your heart tangled and heavy because of the family you love, like I did? Today, I learned that loving your child and clearly drawing a line at their wrongdoing are two different things. I realized it late, but it is not too late. And I believe we can rebuild our families in a way that protects the most vulnerable person first. If you have similar experiences or hidden stories in your heart, please share them quietly in the comments, so we can be a source of comfort and courage to one another. If my story helped you even a little, I would be truly grateful if you could subscribe and like, so we can keep walking together. If a family member or friend comes to mind, please gently share this video with them, so a small bit of hope can reach their heart as well. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the end, and I pray for the health and peace of you and your family for a long time to come.